So yes, there's a lot of familiar faces in the audience. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Dana, and I am working with Rashid. Today I'm going to be talking about some work that we've been doing recently, and that's been published in a paper that's actually published today, I think, in Marine Policy. So the title of the paper, and also the title of the talk, is Flag Use Behavior and IUU Activity Within the International Fishing Fleet. When I say IUU, I mean illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. Unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of acronyms in this presentation. I'm going to try to actually use the full word rather than the acronym to save you from drowning in an ocean of acronyms. So I'm going to begin the presentation by explaining what I mean by flag use behavior, because some of you might not be familiar with the term flags of convenience, open registers, etc. So flag use behavior is related to fishing vessels in the context of international maritime governance. So the control and the jurisdiction of vessels in the global oceans, it depends on where those vessels are operating. So if vessels are operating within national waters, so within the coastal waters, the exclusive economic zone, 200 nautical miles from the coastline of any coastal state, the activities of that vessel falls under the jurisdiction of the coastal state, okay? Now, when vessels are operating outside of the 200 nautical mile limit in international waters, also known as the high seas, then those vessels then fall under the jurisdiction, the control of the flag state. The term flag state is a term I'm also going to be using over and over in this presentation. And what I mean by flag state is it's the country, the state that's associated to the flag that vessel is flying, okay? It's the country that vessel is officially registered under. And that vessel has a responsibility for adhering to any of the international obligations that the flag state has signed up to. Also, the country has a responsibility for enforcing any of the obligations, any of the international treaties that it has signed up to upon all of the vessels that are using its flag, okay? So that's what flag state responsibility means. And those responsibilities are laid out in the UN Convention for the Law of the Sea. And also within the Law of the Sea, it's stated that a genuine link must exist between the flag state of the vessel and the vessel itself, the vessel owner or the beneficial, the real owner of that vessel. There must be a link between the flag state and the vessel owner. The definition of genuine link is a bit elusive, and it's very loosely enforced, if at all. And because of this, there is a behavior that has emerged within the international maritime sector, and that behavior is called flagging out. What I mean by flagging out is when the owner of a vessel chooses to register the vessel under the flag of a foreign nation, so a foreign flag. That nation has absolutely nothing to do with the owner of the vessel. Another term that's used to describe this behavior is using a flag of convenience, also operating under an open register. So that behavior is called flagging out. And it's very common within the international maritime sector, particularly in the shipping industry, because vessel operators can save on costs when they use this business strategy. They can reduce their costs associated to crewing. They can hire staff from anywhere around the world. They can pay them basically anything they want, depending on what flag they choose to use, and they can also avoid taxes. This is the main reason why why vessel owners choose to use this system of flag use, flagging out for economic reasons. There is a lot of controversy associated to the use of flags of convenience, and there's been a lot of criticism for this certain type of behavior. And the reason for this is that there are many countries that have not signed up to all of the major international agreements that are in place for creating minimum standards of safety and environmental protection within the high seas. Also, there are states that have signed up to these international agreements, but for whatever reason, they may not be able to enforce them, or they may not want to enforce them. So unscrupulous vessel owners can choose to make use of this loophole in the system of international maritime governance And they can choose to flag their vessels under these flag states. And by doing this, they're able to get away with illegal or irresponsible behavior. Some things that have been commonly associated to flags of convenience. In the past, slaves have been traded using flags of convenience, alcohol transported during times of prohibition in the United States. And more commonly, in recent times, it's been used and associated to human rights abuses, pollution, and in the context of global fisheries, overfishing. So for all of these reasons, the international community is quite concerned about flag state responsibility. And in recent years, dialogue has emerged amongst international organizations seeking solutions to some of these problems that are facing the high seas. But within this dialogue, the terms that are being used to describe flag use behavior are not very clear. There's an inconsistent use of terms. Some terms are used interchangeably. So flagging out, the behavior of flagging out, has actually been in existence for quite some time. But the term flag of convenience has been around since about the 1950s. And since then, this term has evolved. It has new meanings now, and new terms have also emerged. The reason why this has happened is because there's been a recognition that not all open registers, not all states that are operating open registers are irresponsible in terms of meeting their international obligations. Now, in addition, not all open registers are irresponsible, and in addition, some closed registers actually are irresponsible. So there's no clear, I'm sorry if that kind of confused you a little bit, but it'll become more clear in a bit. For that reason, though, the term flag of convenience has evolved its meaning, and new terms have emerged, such as flags of non-compliance. Obviously, I've confused you, I think, and that's good, that's okay, because there's a lot of confusion right now amongst the international dialogue that's going on at the moment, because these terms are quite confusing. There isn't a concrete set of terms to describe flag use behavior. So we've decided to address this problem and try to develop a concrete set of terms, operational terms, that can be used when we're talking about the issues of flag state responsibility. So flag use behavior, what we did is we reviewed all the literature out there on the topic and also examined the international fishing fleet and looked at the types of flag use behavior that was being used, and we developed a set of definitions. So the flag of a particular vessel can be described in two different ways. Two different approaches can be used to describe flag use behavior. The first approach is according to the relationship that the vessel itself has with the flag state. So the owner of the vessel, what sort of association the owner of the vessel has with the flag state. If it's the same nationality of where that particular vessel owner is from, whether there's some sort of social or economic links. That's the first approach to trying to define a flag. And the second approach is according to the reputation that the flag state itself has. So this has nothing to do with the vessel owner. The vessel owner can be from anywhere. We can know nothing about the vessel owner. It's not important. What's important is the characteristics of the flag state, their reputation in terms of adhering to international obligations. So using these two approaches, we developed a total of 8 different definitions. Some of them existed before, some of these terms existed before, but we've actually defined them here. Because in terms of the terms, flag of convenience or open registers, at the moment, no clear legal definition exists for these terms. So we've tried to define these terms and set them up clearly. So I'm going to take you through slowly each of these terms. So first, using the approach according to vessel-flag-state relationships, the first term that I'll describe here is called a flag of residence. And that is basically the opposite of what I meant by flagging out by using a flag of convenience. That's the definition we've come up with here. It's a flag that's flown by a vessel whose owner holds economic control or resides in a state that does match that of the flag. And I'll use an example to make it a little bit more clear. So me, Dana, I own a fishing vessel. I'm a Canadian, and I own a fishing vessel, and I decide to have my fishing vessel operate in Antarctic waters, international waters off the coast of Antarctica, fishing Patagonian toothfish. I decide to flag my vessel with the Canadian flag and register my vessel under the Canadian register. I am using a flag of residence, okay? If there was no information on record on who I was, where I'm from, where my company is registered, but we do know that there is a vessel with a Canadian flag operating in international waters off the coast of Antarctica, then this flag would be a flag of unknown affiliation, because nothing about the owner is known. Flag of convenience is the opposite of the flag of residence. So as I mentioned before, the term flag of convenience has been around for quite some time, and the meaning of that term has evolved. But we decided to go with the original meaning of the term flag of convenience, and that was originally defined in 1974 by the International Transport Workers Federation. So that meaning, the definition that was given there is when beneficial ownership and control of a vessel is found to be elsewhere than in the country of the flag that that vessel is flying. So an example of that would be me, Canadian, Dana, decides to purchase a fishing vessel that's operating in international waters, and I choose to register my vessel with the Mexican flag, or the Liberian flag, or the Indonesian flag. Any sort of flag but the Canadian flag. That would be using a flag of convenience. And finally, flag unknown is quite obvious. That's when there's no information on the flag at all. We don't know what flag the vessel is flying. So using the second approach, again, this is relating only to the flag state characteristics, has nothing to do with ownership. There's 4 additional definitions. The Food and Agriculture Organization has recognized a need for a term that represents flag states that are really doing a good job of trying to enforce international standards. So they suggested using a term called flag of integrity. This was suggested in a report in about 2009, although a definition for this term wasn't given and no list of flag states that would meet the criteria of being a flag of integrity exists. So we proposed a way of basically defining a flag of integrity. We looked through all of the major international conventions out there in terms of environmental protection, anything relating to fisheries, and narrowed it down to the most important conventions. Then we had a look at which flag states, which countries have either signed up to, acceded to, ratified these various conventions. And we're interpreting that if a country has ratified these agreements, at least they're showing an intention of trying to comply with international standards. So those countries that have signed up to all of the important international conventions that we identified, those flag states are known, the flags of those flag states are known as flags of integrity. So that is a flag belonging to a state that has ratified or acceded to all major international treaties that promote minimum social and environmental vessel standards, and in relation to fisheries, the sustainable exploitation of living marine resources. And the treaties that we identified as being the most important is the UN Convention for the Law of the Sea, which I already mentioned, the UN Fish Stocks Agreement, and the FAO Compliance Agreement. So flag of partial legislation and flag of no legislation, pretty easy after my description of the flag of integrity. So basically, legislation in these terms refers to the 3 pieces, the 3 international instruments that I mentioned in flag of integrity. So if a flag state has signed up to some but not all of these international conventions, they're a flag of partial legislation. If they signed up to none of these international conventions, then they're a flag of no legislation. And the last term that we've identified is a flag of non-compliance. Now this type of flag behavior, I think, would be the type of flag behavior that we should all be the most concerned about. The definition that we've chosen to use here was given by the Food and Agriculture Organization, again in a report written in 2009. Not an official definition by any means, but what they've defined flag of compliance as meaning the flag of a state that exhibits a consistent pattern of failure in compliance with its international obligations. The term flag of non-compliance originated from a regional fisheries management organization, CAMLAR. And as I said, the term flag of convenience, it has evolved, so it takes on the meaning for some organizations that this term actually encompasses. And for other organizations, they've used this new term instead. So, we decided to determine which flag states are flying flags of non-compliance, according to which flag states have been identified by the International Transport Workers Federation as flags of convenience. Again, because it's very confusing, I know, flag of convenience, used by the International Transport Workers Federation, basically means the same thing as flags of non-compliance as I just described. So they've identified about 35 different flag states that represent countries that are not, they're not doing a good job of enforcing international obligations. I've listed 2 additional flag states up there, the Faroe Islands, International Ship Register in Moldova, because for whatever reason they're not included on this lovely image of the poster. Fiji and Guinea, we also decided to include these 2 vessels because recently the European community issued a warning to a number of flag states. A warning because they recognized that these countries were not doing a good job at enforcing international obligations, trying to avoid or reduce the illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing activity. So Fiji and Guinea are amongst the list of flag states that have been recognized as being non-cooperative in efforts to deter illegal fishing activity. So using these 8 definitions, we then applied these definitions to 2 different lists of vessels. And the first list of vessels is basically the international fishing fleet. Information on large-scale fishing vessels of 100 gross tons or more were obtained from SeaWeb. SeaWeb is a database, an international vessel database, the largest existing, I believe. And it's previously known as Lloyd's Register. You may have heard of that before. It goes back hundreds of years, and it includes all vessels in the world that have an International Maritime Organization IMO number. And under international law, all large-scale passenger ships or cargo ships have to have this number. Fishing vessels don't have to have an IMO number, but IMO does give some fishing vessels the number. So those fishing vessels that do have an IMO number are contained within this database. So the SeaWeb database, it represents only about 30 to 40% of the international fishing fleet, but it's pretty good, and it's the best that there exists out there. So the other list of vessels that we looked at is a list of IUU vessels, illegal, unreported, and unregulated vessels. We obtained this list. It's a combined list of 76 vessels, and they've been blacklisted by any of 8 different regional fisheries management organizations. Another acronym are FMOs. And this is a combined list. You can find it online at iuuvessels.org, which is maintained by the Trygg Mat Foundation, a Norwegian foundation. So if you go to this website, you can find those 76 vessels, look at pictures of them, look at their history, why they've been detained for IUU fishing. We all know that there's more than 76 illegally operating fishing vessels in the global oceans, but this list represents the only officially recognized vessels available for referencing. And these are some of the offenders. So these images were taken from that website. So again, using the information extracted from SeaWeb, the flags of all of these fishing vessels were determined, and the locations of ownership, control, or residence were also determined. And then the flags of these vessels were categorized into the 8 different definitions that I laid out for you guys before. And finally, comparisons were made between the global fleet and the 76 IUU vessels. So the objectives of this was, first of all, to characterize the international fisheries according to those 8 definitions. And secondly, we wanted to identify which types of flag use behavior could be considered of greatest concern in relation to IUU fishing. So, if I've confused you up to this point, I'm just going to slow down a little bit and take you through the process that was used in determining what type of flag each vessel was flying. Okay? So the first question that was asked when we looked at the flag is well, first of all, is the flag of the vessel known? Right? Do we know anything about, because sometimes, particularly on the IUU list, there would be no flag. And if there's no flag, that vessel is flag unknown, and it doesn't go any further. If there is a flag, the next question that's asked is the flag listed by the International Transport Workers Federation as an FOC, a flag of convenience, or by the European Community as a non-cooperative nation? If the answer is yes to that, then that flag is a flag of non-compliance. If the answer is no, then another question is asked. Does the flag belong to a state which is acceded to or ratified the UN Law of the Sea, the UN Fish Stocks Agreement, or the FAO Compliance Agreement? If they have ratified all of them, then they're a flag of integrity. Some of them, a flag of partial legislation. None of them, a flag of no legislation. So that's the first layer of flag definitions. Each flag can be defined in 2 separate ways, as I described before. So according to the relationship between the flag owner and the flag state, or sorry, the vessel owner and the flag state, and then according to the characteristics of the flag state itself. So after determining the definition for that first level, we move on to the second level. And ask the question, is information on the ownership of the vessel known? If the answer is no, then it's a flag of unknown affiliation. If the answer is yes, then a final question is asked, and that is, does the flag match the country of control or country of domicile of the registered owner? If it's no, then it's a flag of convenience, and if it's yes, it's a flag of residence. So, any flag, unless it's a flag unknown vessel, it will have 2 separate definitions. It'll either be a flag of integrity, or a flag of partial legislation, or a flag of no legislation, or a flag of non-compliance, and a flag of unknown affiliation, or a flag of convenience, or a flag of residence. Some of our results. I apologize for putting some nasty looking tables up for you guys, but I've highlighted the details that I want to focus on. So this is the top 10 most common flags in states of registered owner control or domicile of the entire large-scale fishing vessel fleet that we looked at. So you can see that the United States is definitely most dominant in terms of the number of flags, and also in terms of the owners, how many. So American flags were most dominant, and also American owners were most dominant in this list. Another thing to notice is of the top 10 most common flags, and also of the top 10 most common owners, they might make up quite a large portion of the total vessels. So about 45% of the total vessels are flagged by the top 10 flags, and about 50% of all of the vessels are owned by the top 10 owners. Another thing to note in this, this table here is that quite a high number of vessels were flag unknown and also owner unknown. That was about 14%. And the reasons for that, it could be varied. Those vessels could be in a stage of transition. They're being sold and bought. But they also could just be in a process of hopping from one flag to another. And for that reason, CWEB is not able to keep track of who the owner is or what the flag is. Oh, another thing I want to point out is Spain. So Spain is quite a popular flag, and a lot of Spanish vessel owners own fishing vessels. But I want to also point out Spain because Spain is also the top owner of flag of convenience vessels. And they own about 20% of all the flag of convenience vessels. So they like to use that type of flag use behavior. More ugly, horrible tables, I'm sorry. So this is going into more detail on the specific flags that were used and the countries of ownership for all the various different types of flags. So the table on the top is the flags according to flag state characteristics, and the table on the bottom are flags according to vessel flag state relationships. Don't pay attention to all of the detail on the table, I just want you to focus on what I've highlighted. And that is Honduras, and Panama. And they're dominant in terms of their presence within this list. So the majority of flags that were flags of non-compliance, Honduras and Panama were dominant, and also with flags of convenience, Honduras and Panama definitely dominated that list. Another thing I want you to notice from this diagram is that if you look at the bottom table and the list of vessels that are most commonly, the list of flags that are most commonly used as flags of convenience flags, of the top 10, 5 of those are also flags of non-compliance, and I've outlined those in black. The last table. This table shows the flags that were used and the countries of ownership or control of all of the IUU vessels. So on the left-hand side are a summary of all the flags that were used, and on the right-hand side is a summary of where the owners were located. So most obvious thing from this table is a very high number, a large number of these vessels were flag unknown and also owner unknown. But what was really interesting is that the most common flag within this list of vessels was the Indonesian flag. And the Togo flag was also quite dominant within this list. Both of those flag states are flags of partial legislation, so they haven't been recognized by the International Transport Workers Federation as flags of convenience. But even though you can see that all those countries that I've highlighted in red, those are flag of non-compliance countries, so there's a lot of them on that list. Also of note is that Panama, Taiwan, and Spain are also are very common owners of vessels that have been operating illegally. So, in comparing the flag composition of the two different groups of vessels, I've developed this figure here. It might look a little bit confusing at first, but on the left-hand side, this image represents all of the IUU listed vessels, and on the right-hand side is the entire fishing fleet. So the size of the circles represents the proportion of all of those vessels that are flagged by that particular flag type. And what I want you to know, or what I want you to see from this image, the first thing that's quite obvious is that the flag composition of the two separate groups of vessels are different. Flags of residence and flags of partial legislation, so the white and the yellow circles, they're more prevalent within the larger fishing fleet. And within the IUU fishing vessels, flags of unknown affiliation, flags of convenience, and also flags of partial legislation are quite prominent. What's most important from looking at these two images side by side is that there's a difference. There is definitely a difference in the flag composition. And most importantly, the use of flags of convenience, so the black circles, the use of flags of unknown affiliation, the gray circles, and the use of flags of non-compliance, the red circles, are much more prevalent within the group of IUU vessels than they are within the general fishing fleet. So just to kind of sum this all up, I'm just going to give a couple of discussion points. It's very encouraging that the majority of vessels within the international fishing fleet were flagged with flags of partial legislation, flags of integrity, or flags of residence. Because what this means is that the majority of fishing vessels operating in our global oceans, there is some sort of association between the vessel owner and the flag state, which is good. And also the flag state has shown some sort of intention of complying with international standards on environmental protection. It must be acknowledged that the estimates of flag of convenience prevalence might be conservative. The reason for that is that there's an existence of a practice called using shell companies. So the owner of a vessel may set up a company in a foreign country. It could be the same country as the flag that they're using, or it could be a completely different country. Generally, they're used for avoiding tax, but it might be used so that they meet an obligation of the flag state of having a company registered in the same country. But what these shell companies do is it gives a false impression that the owner of the vessel actually resides or holds economic control of the vessel in that country when in fact they don't. That company might just exist on paper. Another reason why estimates could be conservative is because this database is only a proportion of the total fishing fleet. It only represents about 30 to 40%. There has been defense of the use of flags of convenience within the international maritime sector. And the defense is that it's an essential strategy to stay competitive. It's an economic strategy. And I would argue that particularly in the fishing sector, flags of convenience clearly enable the use of flags of non-compliance. And flags of non-compliance are not great because they facilitate illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing activity. And we can see this as being quite true within the IUU vessels that we looked at, because within this group of vessels, flags changed up to 11 times, names were changed up to 14 times, and they've been associated, each vessel has been associated with up to a minimum of 8 different companies. So these groups of vessels are really taking advantage of this flag of convenience system to hop from one flag to another. The presence of flags of residence, flags of partial legislation, and flags of integrity were also in that list of IUU vessels. And what that tells us is that just because a flag state is showing an intention of adhering to international obligations doesn't necessarily mean it does have control of all of the vessels within international waters, and some of these vessels may engage in illegal behavior. And then a few just more specific things to mention is that the Indonesian flag was unexpectedly at the top of the list of flags that are most commonly used within that group of IUU vessels. So possibly it could be considered, in particular within the fishing industry, for inclusion as an FONC, unless actions are taken to improve monitoring and control of vessels. And lastly, it was noted that there was a high level of participation by Spain in the use of flags of convenience. And they also had a notable presence within the combined IUU list. So this probably warrants further investigation into the incentives for using this type of flag use behavior. So I'm just going to finish on a number of points. Through this examination of the global database of fishing vessels, and also through looking at IUU fishing vessels in particular, and then comparing the two groups, it's quite clear that flags of convenience and flags of non-compliance should be of concern, and especially in consideration of efforts to deter and eliminate IUU activity. And finally, in moving forward, a greater understanding of the incentives that underlie decisions to pursue this type of flag use behavior could be very helpful in the development of solutions aimed at stemming IUU activity. So I'd just like to acknowledge support received from SHRC and also from the Global Ocean Commission, Somerville College, and Oxford University, which Rashida is affiliated to, and also our colleagues within FIRU at UBC. So thanks to everybody for listening, and I'll welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Dana. Any questions?
Maybe I could ask just a simple one.
Sure.
Why do ships need a flag? And obviously very small vessels don't need a flag. What size vessel do you need to have a flag?
So the need for a flag definitely comes in when a vessel is operating within international waters. And the reason for that is outside of the 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone, no one country has jurisdiction over those waters. No one country has control over those waters. So vessels can basically get away with anything they want to, unless they're tied to a country in some way. So the flag is a way of tying that particular vessel to a country, and then countries have signed up to these international conventions in which they have agreed to maintaining some sort of minimum standard of safety, of environmental protection, of any number of things. So when that vessel flags with a flag state, then that flag state has the responsibility of controlling that vessel. So that's why there's an importance for having a flag within international waters. Within national waters, it may not be as important, but it certainly has importance in international waters.
Yeah, I mean, that's fairly clear, but why not have no flag at all?
There's been suggestions to do that, to just...
No, I don't mean make that a recommendation.
Oh, okay.
But you're saying that have a flag because this then enables countries to look after their fishing fleets.
Yeah.
But if you're a fisherman and you've got a boat, why bother to get a flag?
Oh, okay. I get what you mean.
I'm
Okay,
asking
so
from that direction.
the high seas are like no man's land. It's not land, but ocean. So if you don't have a flag, then any vessel can board you. You have no rights. You're completely exposed to piracy. You're completely exposed to anything. So it's actually for protection, and you don't have any rights. It's just floating in the ocean, completely exposed.
Yeah.
That's the reason.
And so Indonesia, if I had a flag of convenience from Indonesia, Indonesia would protect me on the high seas?
Technically. So
Yeah,
at first,
bit unlikely.
flags of convenience were actually used more so for their protection, for political reasons. But now that system is being kind of abused. Within international legislation, international law, it's generally thought that having a flag when operating in the high seas is internationally agreed upon standard. So even though a country may not have ratified the law of the sea, which states that you must have a flag when operating in international waters, it's kind of just internationally agreed that's how things operate.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next question.
Can I just clarify a couple of things? I'm not a lawyer, but I don't know if we have one in the house. But you got to be careful because flag and national waters and EEZs are three completely different things. National waters are up to 12 nautical miles. Beyond that, they are not national waters, which also with regards to the protection and so on, the moment you leave national waters that is beyond 12 nautical miles, you are actually in high seas waters, except with regards to the exploitation of marine resources, where you're still within the EEZ, where the flag, the coastal state has responsibility. But you can pass through it, you have innocent passage and so on. That's the one point. The other point is regards to protection. Each country has their own definition on what size vessel needs to be registered in that country for any kind of purposes, like car registration and so on. And the moment you're registered, you're actually flying the flag of that country. So if a small boat of if countries says boats under 10 meters don't need to be registered because we've got 10,000 artisanal boats, then those don't actually fly a flag because they're not registered.
Yeah.
But if it's a commercial vessel, including a larger fishing vessel of 15 meters, and the country decides they need to be registered, then they automatically have the flag of the country.
Thank you
Unless they
for the
reflag.
clarification. Yeah, I'm speaking about international waters on a large scale more so that's why I wasn't kind of
Yeah,
talking about
and there the protection thing, indeed, if you fly an Indonesian flag and you drive your boat through the Atlantic, there's no Indonesian vessel to protect you. But other countries do recognize that they have responsibilities towards Indonesia as a country, and therefore they might step up to protect you, or at least not infringe your rights. So it's kind of part of the international accepted standard of behavior of why there is a protection.
That would then give those countries that have good compliance a power structure to make other countries comply.
they would have that, yeah.
They
And
would-
I
they
think
would
behind the
agree.
scenes that's working to some extent as well. That's why some former flag of convenience countries have kind of improved their act, because other countries have put pressure on them through trade and through all other measures.
And that's
Thank
how
you for
our
the-
FMOs are trying to operate as well.
Thanks for the clarification. We'll accept other questions, but please be concise because we have many questions actually. So, Wolf was first.
You didn't mention anything about the port state responsibility, port state measures, agreements for port state measures, and you think that's going to change the way flag of convenience fishing behaves?
Yeah, definitely. No, I just, I didn't mention it here, but it's mentioned in our paper. That's definitely been what has been suggested pretty much internationally is trying to improve port state measures. And there's a international agreement right now that is not in force at the moment, but hopefully will be in force soon. So that is a proposed suggestion.
Yeah, so moving the responsibility from flag states to the port states.
Exactly, yeah.
Whenever you come in, you have to make sure you...
Yeah, but there is an issue with fishing vessels in that some fishing vessels don't actually go into port, so they'll transfer fish at sea, so there's no way of monitoring those vessels. So for the fishing industry, it's a little bit more difficult, but it certainly has a lot of relevance for the shipping industry.
Daniel?
I would like you to show the flow chart again, because to me this is eye candy. This is intellectually satisfying that to have a system that is closed in this way, that self-defines the various definitions that you gave in Word. They are here operationally defined through a relationship with each other. That is neat.
Thank you.
Amanda?
Well, I'll take off from there then. First of all, it's really nice to hear somebody committing to understanding all this and moving it forward. I'm trying to imagine the implementation of any of this and where this is going to lead us, because if you spend any time in UN quarters or in any governance framework, definitions can become a huge, complex, and rather intractable issue. When I look at that, I'm barely grasping it, and I knew most of this coming in. I'm trying to imagine any implementation of this, and what would you like this to do in a perfect world? Apart from serving, as Daniel put it, as a good intellectual exercise that allows for some extra light to be shed on the issue, how does this translate into anything?
Okay. Well, quite honestly, the reason why I went through this process is because, as you may know, my project is on flag use behavior in general. And when I first started looking at this issue, I realized that I can't really move forward in talking about this because there's no solid, concrete definitions. I myself needed definitions in order to talk about the issue. So that's why we decided to develop these definitions. So when I'm communicating these problems and discussing these problems, then I can refer to vessels in a specific way. So I'm not sure if I really had an intention for these to be used in terms of policy, but they would definitely serve a purpose, if not for anybody else, but for myself in writing about this a little bit more, because when I'm referring to flags of convenience, it means something specifically. I don't have to, go through this process every single time I write a paper.
Okay.
But Dana, I think that with that expertise, it would be great if you did now take a step
Yeah.
forward and figure out what of this needs to be brought into the policy arena.
Yes,
Rather
yeah.
than this mosaic.
Actually,
Something?
just to add, she's very modest, it could be useful for your work. But already I can report that the Global Ocean Commission is picking some of these and trying to get it into their policy. I mean, just knowing the red box, that percentage, and saying, look, this is the percentage that is destroying things, let's go after that. That's one of the ways.
I think it would be very useful to consider to put it into the IMO, because IMO obviously started making some sort of like future visions, which they published in Rio 20. So they're moving forward with not just maritime, but also with the marine environment as well. So that's something that's
I'm
quite
just
nice.
imagining the UN arena on this, and it's mind-blowing.
Yeah. It's very useful.
Adam?
Hi, two-part question. Can we go back to that diagram, the circles?
Yep.
And it seems, it's actually very telling, and it seems that you would be able from that to make some predictions on the use of the port state measure discuss those sort of predictions of where that can go? And the second part is, when you look at the definitions, have you looked at domestic regulations and how they define, if state defines, applies, or just looked at the international?
Okay, so for the second question first, that is where the next step with this will go. I'm going to be looking specifically at certain case studies, so certain countries that are really actively involved in fishing within international waters, and countries that are making use of this flag of convenience system quite a bit, and then countries that aren't, and making comparisons between actual national policies. So that's where the second question is. And I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand the first one. So in terms of port state measures?
Yes, because, port state measures is trying to deal with some of these problems, right?
Yes.
And from that diagram and the effect, which countries represent a bigger part of the problem and the percentage, that diagram and the previous, the tables, that just comes to me that from that, you can make some predictions on which countries could be more effective if they sign on to the agreement.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you did actually look into that yet.
I haven't specifically looked into detail on port state measures, but yeah, that's certainly a really good point. That this exercise of examining which countries are using these types of behaviors more or less, it was a really important information in terms of pursuing countries to sign these sort of agreements, because there's no point in converting a country that's already operating fine. So yeah, it's a very good point. Yes?
In regions of the world where fisheries regulation, monitoring, and enforcement is more common, it's probably more likely that IUU fishing will be detected. So in this comparison of flag composition, were you able to account for that selection-wise in just comparing these two circle diagrams?
No, I haven't looked at specific areas of the world or where the vessels themselves are operating. So my focus is primarily on kind of international waters and the IUU problems there. No, I haven't, but I will be moving on to that sort of thing in further. So this paper, it's the first paper of my postdoctoral work, and the purpose of it for me was to set kind of foundation for moving forward and investigating more issues in depth, such as port state measures, such as specific countries that are involved in behavior, and also specific locations where the fishing activity takes place.
What about the case of landlocked countries? Would it make more sense for them to fly a flag of convenience, or for their...
In terms of being able to enforce things on their... Well, it's interesting that you mentioned landlocked countries, because a few of them are actually used as flags of convenience. I think what's important for them is that those countries can't be ignored in terms of signing up to these international conventions. Maybe not port state measures, obviously it doesn't apply. Because if they are allowing vessels to flag under their register, then they are taking responsibility for those vessels, and they have to adhere to the international obligations. So if they're not able to, then they shouldn't be allowing vessels to sign up on their register.
Any more questions? Since we don't have any more questions, so thank you, Dana.